Hello, travelers. Welcome to Reach the World STEM Week. For over 20 years, Reach the World has inspired youth to become curious, confident, and compassionate global citizens via virtual exchange. My name is Tim, and as part of Reach the World's efforts to support educators and families during the COVID-19 pandemic, we are using the power of Zoom to share free live stream events with members of our global community. You can find a complete listing of upcoming events, great at-home learning resources, and much more on our website, athome.reachtheworld.org. I know that so many of you are excited for today's live stream conversation with Kevin Hand. Kevin has a long and fascinating job title. He's NASA's pre-project scientist for the Europa Lander mission and director of the Jet Propulsion Lab's Ocean Worlds Lab. Wow, Kevin is joining us today to talk about alien oceans on Earth and beyond, and he's also going to be answering your questions. So to all our live stream viewers, welcome. The YouTube chat bar is the perfect way to let us know you're here and the perfect way to share any questions you have for Kevin. We're going to be taking some questions from on-camera participants too, as well as the live chat. So we'll have a great conversation after we hear a little bit from Kevin. We really do want to hear from you, and we'll get to as many questions as possible. But without further delay, it's time for show and tell with NASA's Kevin Hand. Welcome, Kevin.
Hi, Tim. Thanks. Thanks for putting this all together, and it's such a great organization, and it's a delight to be here with you today. And I love your background.
Thank you.
So I've got some slides. What I'd love to do is just sort of go through some of the science behind alien oceans and the search for life beyond Earth. And then I've got some show and tell items. So I'll try and move somewhat quickly through the slides. So I apologize if I move a little fast, but obviously this is recorded and you can go back and listen to it again if there's anything that needs to be repeated. And of course, I want to get to questions. So should I just dive in, Tim? What's the plan?
Go for it. We're ready.
Excellent. Okay. Well, so I'm going to talk with you all today about alien oceans and the search for life beyond Earth. Now, what's critical here is that when I talk about the search for life beyond Earth, when I talk about alien life, I just want to set your expectations at the right level. I am not really talking about ET or plush little creatures that you see in Hollywood movies. When I talk about the search for life elsewhere, and for the most part, when we consider robotic missions to go and search for life beyond Earth, we're talking about missions that are searching for even the tiniest of microbes. And such a discovery would truly revolutionize our understanding of life in the universe, how biology works, and where life on Earth came from and started. And so really, when we think about the search for life elsewhere, this might be the kind of image that we have. This is a scanning electron microscope image that I took of some samples from the deep ocean. And these little spheres that you see there are those very tiny spheres that are just a few microns or a few millionths of a meter across. That is the type of image that one might get from a distant world. Here, as I mentioned, these are microbes that live in the deep ocean. But instead of seeing ET or plush creatures, this might be the type of thing that we see someday from a distant world. A similar, an image from the same sample shows this incredible structure. This is a little more tantalizing, but again, this is still a microscopic organism. This one actually looks kind of like a starship, but really it's a structure from a foraminifera that we found in the deep ocean. So that just sets the stage for you. This is a question that has captivated my imagination since I was the age of probably many of you out there listening. I grew up in the beautiful state of Vermont under the clear night sky of Vermont, and the stars there captivated my imagination, as did books like this from National Geographic, which had all sorts of cool drawings of crazy creatures that they speculated might exist out there in our solar system. So my imagination was captured by reading a lot of books and exploring my own backyard and the mountains around me as a child. And one of the reasons I like to show that picture too is because the mountains, the Green Mountains of Vermont, are so lush and covered with life. And if anything, the story of the search for life beyond Earth is the story of our beautiful blue marble shown here, which is just teeming with life. And our little blue marble reaching out into our solar system and beyond, searching for signs of life elsewhere to see whether or not we are alone. And when we think about that search, if there's anything that we've learned from our study of life here on Earth, it's that life needs water. And so when it comes to the search for life elsewhere, we really target the search for liquid water, either past or present, on these distant worlds. And our exploration of the solar system has brought us to many, many different worlds. These lines shown here, this is a graphic made by National Geographic, and each of the lines emanating from the Earth there represents one robotic spacecraft, some of which failed, some of which succeeded. And some of those spacecraft have gone off to the moon and Venus and the sun. Some have gone to Mars, and our search for life on Mars has been a key point of exploration for many decades now. And a few spacecraft have gone out beyond the asteroid belt and have gone past or orbited worlds like Jupiter and Saturn, Uranus and Neptune. And I'll talk more about those later. But when it comes to the search for life and the search for water, Mars has been a prime place for our exploration. Mars is currently dry and cold, but we think that Mars did once have liquid water oceans and seas and rivers and lakes. And right now, the Curiosity rover is exploring Mars. It's in a crater called Gale Crater, and it's slowly making its way up this mountain that's inside the crater called Mount Sharp. And hopefully, let's see, Tim, just a check. Are the videos playing okay?
We're having a little bit of a lag time in the connection, but I see the still image right now, and it's moving across that landscape, but not perfectly smoothly. It's seeable.
Okay, so when I do some videos, I'll just ask for your feedback and make sure it comes across okay. So what we were just panning across is an ancient stream bed or riverbed on Mars. And the Curiosity rover is looking for past life on Mars, ancient fossils of microbes. But part of what excites me is that when we go further out in the solar system, we've actually discovered that some of the moons of the outer solar system, these are moons of Jupiter and Saturn, perhaps some of the moons of Uranus and Neptune. These moons, many of which are covered in ice, have liquid water oceans beneath their icy shells, and these are oceans that exist there today. And that means that since there could be liquid water there today, that life could exist there today. And that's a bit of a contrast with Mars, where Mars today is cold and dry, but billions of years ago, Mars may have been wet and had liquid water flowing over it. These moons, which I'm showing here around our home planet, these are moons with names like Europa, Ganymede and Callisto, 3 moons of Jupiter, Titan and Enceladus, 2 moons of Saturn. And I've even got Neptune's curious moon Triton here. These are moons where we have good reason to predict, and we've got good evidence indicating that liquid water oceans exist today. And so that's very exciting when it comes to the search for life. These are worlds where life could be alive today. And these worlds are really kind of changing our understanding of habitability. In the early days of astronomy and planetary science, we had this kind of Goldilocks thinking for what it took for a world to be habitable. And that Goldilocks scenario went like this. In order for a world to have life, in order for it to be habitable, you had to have liquid water on the surface. And in order to have liquid water on the surface, you needed to be close enough to the sun, or you needed to be close enough to your parent star, such that your planet had enough energy to keep the liquid water liquid. And in the case of our solar system, Venus was too close to the sun and too hot, so it boiled off any water that it once had. Mars is basically too far away, at least now. Maybe it was a little bit warmer in the past. But Earth is at just the right Earth-Sun distance. And so Earth has got this sweet spot. It's in the Goldilocks zone. And so that was sort of the original way to think about habitability, the original way to think about what it took for a world to be habitable. But these moons of the outer solar system are teaching us that this is an old Goldilocks. There's a new Goldilocks in town, and it's one where the energy for maintaining liquid water, the energy for maintaining liquid water oceans, comes from the tides, the stretching and pulling that these moons experience as they orbit giant worlds like Jupiter. And so here's a picture of Io, Jupiter's innermost large moon, and Io is the most volcanically active body in the solar system. That little plume near the top of Io there in the inset, that's a volcano erupting on Io. And Io is so volcanically active because of the stretching that it experiences as it orbits Jupiter. And so the large moons of Jupiter, Io, Europa, Ganymede, and Callisto, kind of present this new Goldilocks, where Europa, Ganymede, and Callisto, we think, have liquid water oceans. And Europa in particular, we think, has a liquid water ocean of about 60 miles or 100 kilometers in depth beneath its icy shell. And so that new Goldilocks is really changing the way we think about habitable worlds in our own solar system and beyond, because again, if we've learned anything about life on Earth, it's that where you find the liquid water, you generally find life. From life in extreme environments like Antarctica, the rift valleys of Africa, shown there on the upper right, or the deep sea hydrothermal vents, which I'll show a little bit about later in this talk. From life in extreme environments to life of extreme lifestyles. Here are some crazy rock stars. All life on Earth depends on liquid water. So let's dive into these alien oceans, these moons of the outer solar system that we think have these liquid water oceans. The first thing to appreciate is that much of the information about these moons, about these oceans, come from spacecraft that NASA has built, many of which have been built at the Jet Propulsion Laboratory where I work. And on the left there is the Cassini spacecraft, and on the upper right is the Galileo spacecraft. And at the bottom right is the Deep Space Network, or one of the antenna that is part of the Deep Space Network that gets the data back from the spacecraft. And so the Cassini spacecraft orbited Saturn, shown here, and sent back information about Enceladus. Enceladus is a curious little moon. It's about 500 kilometers or 300 miles across. Here I'm showing it with reference to the Great Lakes. And Enceladus it's covered in ice, but it's got these fractures near the South Pole, these fractures in its ice. And when the Cassini spacecraft flew by those fractures, it took this picture. And normally, if we could all be in a room together, I would hope that all of you students would ooh and awe, because this is truly an amazing picture. And so here I'm just going to put a little ooh and awe on the picture. And so what you're seeing is, out of those fractures are these jets of water. And these jets have salts and carbon compounds and all sorts of interesting stuff that we think connects back to an ocean beneath the ice of Enceladus. And that's incredibly exciting. Here's what the surface looks like up close. Here's those fractures up close. That little sort of circular dark spot kind of in the right part of the image, that may be a site where a jet is erupting right now. And that if you could dive down through that hole, you might eventually reach the ocean below. So this is what we think Enceladus looks like. It's got this icy shell with jets erupting out of fractures in the ice towards the South Pole. And under that is a global ocean. And under that is a kind of mixed rocky seafloor. And the rocky seafloor, as you'll see in a few slides, is particularly important when we think about what it takes for life to survive. Next stop is Europa. Europa is a much, much bigger moon. Europa is about the size of our moon, and I'm showing it here to scale with our moon and the Earth and Jupiter. And here again, think about this. Jupiter is 318 times as massive as the Earth. And you might be familiar with the tides that occur in our ocean because of the Earth and the moon interacting. Now imagine that you're on Europa and you're orbiting Jupiter and the stretching that would occur. It turns out that if you could stand on Europa, you would rise and fall by about 100 feet during each Europan day because of those tides. And again, that's where the energy comes from that allows these oceans to exist within Europa and these other worlds. They're too far away to have energy from the sun to maintain the liquid water, but the tidal dissipation provides that energy. And I know that's a difficult concept, but if you just take a paper clip and twist it and eventually break it, you'll feel the heat on the ends of the broken part of the paperclip. That kind of mechanical energy is the same kind of energy that occurs within a world when it's tugged and pulled by tides. I know many of the listeners out there, they're brilliant young students, so I'm putting out some difficult concepts, but it's fun science. This is what Europa looks like up close. You can see the scale bar on the right there, and this is the fractures in the ice. I don't have time to go into every feature that you see here, but the fractures, the cracks we predict are caused by the tides, cracking that ice shell and perhaps connecting to the ocean below. Some of my work and some of the work of many of my friends and colleagues has examined the reddish color that you see there. And we think that that coloration is due to salts from the ocean below. Here's another image, and in this one, you might think that you're looking at icebergs, icebergs coming from Greenland or Antarctica or something that we see here on Earth. But these are not icebergs on Earth. These are fractured ice rafts on the ice shell of Europa. And we don't fully understand what's happening geologically here, but you can see that some of those ice rafts can be puzzle pieced back together, and at one point they were all connected. It's far too cold on Europa for these to be floating away in seawater the way things happen on Earth. The surface of Europa is about minus 280 degrees Fahrenheit. In other words, it's really, really cold, and there's no atmosphere. And so these rafts cannot really float around the way they would on Earth. And we still have a lot to understand, and that's part of what's cool about science. Every time you make a discovery, there are new questions that arise. So this is what we think Europa looks like if we open it up. It's got this ice shell. Tim, is this video playing okay?
Yeah, it looks fantastic.
Cool. We've got this ice shell, and the colors there are kind of indicating that the ice shell might be flowing. And in other words, stuff from the ocean might be cycled up to the surface. And so we think the ice shell might serve as a window into the ocean below. And if there is life in the ocean, then perhaps we can study the ice shell to learn about life within the ocean. Okay, so back to some basics. Earlier I mentioned that life as we know it needs liquid water. Well, life also needs some other things. What does life need? I mentioned water. Life also needs, and here again, if we were all in a room together, I'd have you shout out, what does life need? And you'd probably say things like food
Hey,
and
Kevin,
oxygen.
can I interrupt you real quick? Let's ask some
Yeah,
of our on-camera participants, if you don't mind.
yeah,
We have a
absolutely. If
bunch of
that's
students
possible.
with us who may have some answers to that question. Why don't we start with, let's see here. Let's start with Fernesi. Fernesi, I'm going to unmute you. Do you have a guess as to what life needs beyond water?
Food,
Food.
as in like
Excellent.
something to eat and give it energy.
Hey, oh, this is fantastic. So you said the word energy. That's going to be very important as we move forward. Great answer.
Yeah, great
Uh,
one.
and so along with energy, and I'm sorry, let me I can't see your name there. What's
Yeah,
your name?
Fernesi,
Cronesi. Is it Cronesi or Frenesi?
with an F,
With an F.
like Frank.
Frenesi.
Yep.
So energy, and then also, why do you need food? What do you do with the food?
Well, it goes in your system, obviously. Besides energy, it's just like in a way you kind of need it. You don't need it, but you need it to live because it just I don't know how to explain it, but it's just like it's really helpful.
Yep. What are you made of? And how old are you right now?
12.
12. And you are, there's a word with a G. You're
Growing.
growing. Thank you. Yeah. So you're growing, and so you need food both for the energy and to build yourself, right? So when we think about what life needs, we need the building blocks, and we get that from food, and we need energy. And so you're spot on there, Fernesi. And Tim, were there other students out there who had similar
Yeah,
thoughts?
sure. Let's ask one or two more people what they think. Tiara, I'm going to unmute you. Do you have any other guesses for what we need, what life needs?
A home to live in.
A home?
A home,
That's a
shelter.
good guess.
Yep, and we'll get into some interesting shelters that life, or some places that life uses as a shelter.
All right, great. Let's ask James real quick. James, do you have any other guesses? What do you think life needs?
Maybe oxygen.
Oxygen, excellent, and that's part of the energy equation also. And so, just as a lead-in to what I'm going to talk about next, when we think about energy and what we eat plants and animals, and the animals that we eat other plants and animals, and the base of the food chain comes back to plants. And what do the plants use for energy?
Let's unmute another student and ask. Hey, John Paul, if you turn your microphone on, I can get you on here, but I'll come back around to you. Let's see here. Same with you, Josiah. If you want to join, you got to turn your microphone on. We'd love to hear from you. Let's go back to Fernesi. She had some fantastic ideas. What do plants need, Fernesi?
Water, soil, and they obviously need to be by the sun in order to grow.
Bingo! That's what I was looking for, Nessie. Excellent. So and what's that process that the plants do with the sunlight?
Do you guys hear me?
Yep, we can hear you.
Okay. Can you ask it again? Sorry.
So you mentioned sunlight, and that's exactly what I was looking for. What's the big word that describes what plants do to harness energy from the sun?
It's a tough one to be put on the spot with.
Here, I'll give you the beginning.
Photosynthesis.
Bingo! Exactly.
Awesome.
Excellent. Now, here's a question for you. When we think about these alien oceans like Europa and Enceladus, these moons that are covered in ice, do you think that any sunlight is going to make it through that ice?
I'm going to loop in John Paul to take a try at this one. What do you think, John Paul?
Okay.
Kevin's asking if you think that photosynthesis and plants growing from sunlight can take place through the ice of Europa? Yeah, I'll try. Okay, you're unmuted now, John
I
Paul.
can see him. Go
Yeah,
ahead,
it's just
John
like
Paul.
kind of delayed.
Oh, okay.
I got you now, though.
All right. Well, we'll come back to you if you want to. We'll loop back around to you, John Paul. Let's see here. Tiara, do you want to try and give that one a try?
Can you please say the question again, please?
So, Tiara, I described these oceans that are covered in ice, like Europa's ocean and Enceladus's ocean. Do you think photosynthesis is possible when you've got these thick ice shells above the oceans?
I don't think so.
Yep. So what we're going to talk about next is what life can do when there's no sunlight available. And for that, we come back to planet Earth, back to our home planet. And I've been very fortunate that I've had the chance to explore all sorts of extreme environments on Earth, from the depths of our ocean to the Arctic to the Antarctic to deserts and things. And but one of the most amazing places that I've ever gotten to experience is the depths of our own ocean. And this was part of an expedition almost 20 years ago on a Russian research vessel, and we took a number of submersibles down into the ocean. And what we were examining were these environments. And Tim, so there's a video that is hopefully streaming okay right now. Is that going through?
Yeah, zooming in on the ocean. Yeah.
Yeah. And this is a video clip from an IMAX movie called Aliens of the Deep. So I should give credit to Disney. So I'm using this. And so what we're doing is diving down to the bottom of the ocean to these regions where you've got essentially hot springs on the bottom of the ocean. And we refer to these hot springs as hydrothermal vents. This is what they look like up close. And again, hopefully this is streaming okay, Tim.
Yeah, it's looking good. Wow, amazing.
So check this out. This, see all that stuff that looks like black smoke? That's not smoke at all. That's superheated water. And it's very rich in all sorts of interesting compounds, things like hydrogen and methane and sulfur compounds and iron compounds. And what is truly amazing about these deep, dark depths of our ocean is that these are ecosystems. And by that, I mean, there's lots of different creatures. You can see a crab there along this hydrothermal vent tower. These are ecosystems cut off from sunlight. And the microbes that form the base of the food chain here, the white material that you see along the edge of the chimneys, those microbes are doing a process called chemosynthesis. They're harnessing the chemistry of the hydrothermal vents to build the base of the food chain. And then the crabs and other creatures are feeding off of those microbes. And so it's chemosynthesis instead of photosynthesis that helps power these ecosystems in the depths of our own ocean here on Earth. And by studying those ecosystems in the depth of our own Earth, where you've got microbes and other organisms that are surviving without the sun, we think we have potentially an interesting example of what life could look like in the deep, dark depths of these alien oceans like Europa or Enceladus. Because their photosynthesis is probably not going to be possible, but chemosynthesis on the seafloors of those worlds might be possible. So, chemosynthesis is a very interesting realm for a lot of microbiologists. I studied physics and astronomy and robotics and some geology and microbiology. But a lot of times I tell young students, go into microbiology because there are a ton of interesting microbes out there on planet Earth that need to be studied in great detail. And if you study those microbes, you'll also have a chance to go out and explore pretty extraordinary environments on our home planet. So I'm just going to end with a few more kind of fun slides of exploration and what's next. And then I want to go to questions and maybe do a little show and tell. I'm sitting next to my little curio cabinet here, and there are a few artifacts that might be fun. This is a robotic vehicle that our team built and brought down to Antarctica recently. We've also deployed this robot up in Alaska, and it's designed, you can see a little penguin that was taking interest in it. It's designed to float on the underside of the ice. Here I am on the left with my friend and colleague Dan, and we're about ready to dunk it in. And this robotic vehicle floats and rolls on the underside of the ice so that it can study organisms that feed off of the chemistry of the ice-water interface. Now, some of these organisms, most of these organisms here are doing photosynthesis, but when it goes dark during the Antarctic winter, different organisms take over, and that's part of what we're trying to study. So that's one robotic vehicle that we're using to study our home planet. And someday we hope to fly something like this to Europa. Here's another example in an expedition back in 2016 and also earlier, back in 2019. I was up in the Arctic, and I was on this ship, and we were studying hydrothermal vents up near the North Pole that are trapped under ice. And we deployed this robotic vehicle that was designed and built by the Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution. And I've got an adjunct position there. And the brilliant scientists and engineers at the Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution sent this robotic vehicle over the side of the ship, and it went down into the depths of the ocean. We didn't find any hydrothermal vents on that expedition, but we did find these bizarre sponges, that sort of weird looking thing there that's in the center. And that sponge is covered by a bunch of microbes. And then on top of the sponge and the microbes, you see that starfish. And nobody had ever seen this stuff before. We were the first to see it. And that's part of what's exciting about exploration and discovery and some of the great work yet to be done on our home planet when it comes to science and engineering that allows us to get into these environments. Lastly, when it comes to actually getting back out to these alien oceans and exploring Europa and Enceladus and Titan and these other worlds, on the left is an artist's rendering of the Europa Clipper mission, which NASA is moving forward with, and that will orbit Jupiter and fly by Europa some 45 times, taking lots of pictures and spectra and other things. And then on the right is an artist's conception of a lander on the surface of Europa. And I'm a scientist on the Clipper mission, and I'm helping to spearhead the effort to land on Europa. And this is a mission that's going to take a long time to come to fruition. I may not live long enough to see the lander on Europa. I hope. I got to keep jogging. But many of you listening could be scientists or engineers helping to make that mission possible. So please, we need your help. And with that, I think I'll finish and we can go to questions and some fun show and tell. I'll stop sharing my screen, Tim. Does that sound good?
Yeah, that sounds great. We just have so many questions for you. I want to thank our on-camera participants for jumping in with some of the questions in the middle of the presentation. I'm just going to try to get to some of the questions from the feed, and if you want to give sort of short answers, I'm sure all of these questions have long answers and short answers. We'll try to get through as many as we can. Does that sound good?
Sure, and as I mentioned, I'm delighted to come back anytime, and so yeah, the questions and the answers so far have been. You got brilliant students out there.
We do. Wow, they had some great answers to your questions in your presentation. I want to take a first question from Layla. Layla would like to know, when do you think people are going to go to Mars and Mars's moons?
Yeah, it's a great question. It was Layla, right?
Yes.
Great question, Layla. It's unclear exactly when humans will first set foot, but I certainly hope it's within the next 20 years. I think the combination of the efforts that NASA is making, along with the efforts that the private space sector is making, make it realistic that astronauts could go to Mars within the next 20 years. NASA is currently planning on getting astronauts back to the surface of the moon within the next decade, and that's very exciting. And I hope that maybe many of you out there might want to be some of those astronauts that go out to these worlds. I certainly would love to explore those worlds too.
Great. Lucy would like to know, if we do find life, would we try to bring it back to Earth, or would that be too dangerous?
Yeah, that's a great question. And for the most part, we would study it there. We would, the scientific term for that is in situ. We would study it in Europa's ocean. We would study it in the lakes of Titan. We would study it in the ocean of Enceladus. And part of that is because it's too hard to get samples back in many cases. But with Mars, we are actually engaged in a process in a sequence of robots that will return samples from the surface of Mars back to the Earth so that they can be studied in great detail in laboratories here on Earth. Now, in that case, we're talking about hopefully finding rock samples on Mars that contain ancient molecular fossils or structural fossils of past life on Mars. So on Mars, it's possible. In the outer solar system, it gets a little bit trickier.
Okay, very cool. Daryl and Liam in San Francisco want to know, do we think landforms will ever emerge on alien oceans or come out of the oceans in maybe the way volcanoes do on Earth?
Yeah, that's a fantastic question. You know, you can get a PhD on that just by wondering about that question. And the short answer is we don't think so. And in fact, some of the data for Europa and Enceladus have been examined with that question in mind, which is that, think about it, if there were a very large volcano in the oceans of Europa or Enceladus, that volcano might hook onto the ice, and the ice shell would then be kind of stuck, and it wouldn't rotate or wobble back and forth. Well, at Enceladus, planetary scientists have actually seen the ice shell wobble enough to indicate that it's not hooked onto a volcano or a mountain coming up from the seafloor. And there's also some indication that that's true for Europa also. In other words, that its ice shell is kind of free floating and it's not hooked on a seamount or something coming up from the seafloor.
Very interesting. As sort of a follow-up question to that, are the planets as cold as the space around them?
That's, boy, man, yeah, you do have brilliant students out there. So kind of a two-part answer here. One is that oftentimes the main blanket that planets and moons have from the coldness of space is the atmosphere. And so on Earth, our atmosphere helps kind of contain some heat that helps keep us warmer than we otherwise would be without our atmosphere. Europa and Enceladus don't have atmospheres. And so their blanket that protects the ocean below is the ice shell. And just think about, I don't know how many of you have ever had the chance to build a snow cave during the winter. You know, it might be cold outside on a winter day, but if you build a little snow cave, it's often nice and warm inside the snow cave. And that's because snow can be a pretty good insulator. Well, on these ice-covered ocean worlds like Europa and Enceladus, their ice shells help insulate the oceans from the coldness of space. And the liquid water in that ocean is not too cold. It's, you know, hovers around freezing, but it's liquid water. It's liquid.
All right. I want to go back to John Paul on the call. He's been waiting so patiently. John Paul, do you have a question you want to ask to Kevin?
Yeah, I just wanted to say I've always wanted to become an astronaut, but my stomach wouldn't be too happy with that. I wanted to ask, would you encourage someone to become an astrobiologist, and what steps would they need to take in order to become one?
That's a great question, John Paul. And 100%, I would encourage young students to become astrobiologists. And then the steps there are many different paths. And so I'll describe my own path briefly, but one of the great things about astrobiology is that there are many different paths. And the most important thing is that you follow your curiosity. And to that end, so this is my little curio cabinet here. I don't know if you can see it behind me. But one of my favorite pictures here, let's see if I can, I don't know if you can see that. There's a bit of a reflection there, but that's a maple tree that my older brother and I used to stand under when we were waiting for the bus when I was probably about your age. And my first adventures, my initial curiosity was captivated just by climbing trees and exploring mud puddles and the woods in the backyard. Again, I was very fortunate to grow up in the countryside of Vermont. But just follow your curiosity. Now, practically, I studied physics and astronomy, and then I got a master's in robotics, and I got a PhD, which many people, I didn't know what a PhD was until I was halfway through college. But a PhD is a program where you spend about 5 to 7 years really pushing the frontier of science. And in a PhD program, you pursue something at great length. And many astrobiologists have come from a bunch of different disciplines. My PhD was about Europa, and I was in the Geological Environmental Sciences department up at Stanford, and then partially in the astrophysics department at Princeton. So I kind of went from geology to astrophysics. But as I mentioned earlier, microbiology is a great area to go into because there's a lot of important microbiology work to be done here on Earth. And we need more microbiologists getting engaged with NASA. And we also need more oceanographers getting engaged with NASA. And part of why I'm encouraging you to go into those disciplines is because you can be an astrobiologist who's part of NASA missions as a microbiologist or a geochemist or an oceanographer, but you can also get really important work done on our home planet. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that was such
Yeah.
a great question, John Paul. Thank you very much. We have, I want to go back to Fernesi real quick. She was so great at answering Kevin's question on the call, and she's been waiting really patiently with her hand raised. I think she's got a question for you, Kevin.
I was gonna ask you, what was it that about life beyond oceans that really interested you? Like, what was it about it that grabbed your attention?
Can you repeat that middle section again, Fernesi?
Yeah. What was it about life beyond oceans that interested you? Like, what was it about it that grabbed your attention?
Yeah, so as a young child, I got captivated with the idea of, are we alone? Could there be life beyond Earth? And does it have dreams and ideas and think about, and here I'm just speculating, imagine if there were intelligent creatures within the ocean of Europa. Or intelligent creatures on some distant planet out there in the galaxy. What is its philosophy? What kind of religious beliefs does it have? What kind of music does it make? What kind of art does it make? And, you know, in the same way that every place I explore here on planet Earth, every culture I've interacted with, every organism that I've had the good fortune to see, you know, it sounds cliched, but I find life on Earth to be truly beautiful. And all of the science aside, part of what is at the root of my passion is just the beauty that I find in life on Earth and the prospect for life and biology to be all over the stars and the worlds that we see out there in our solar system and beyond. So at the end of the day, it's that curiosity and that appreciation of the beauty of biology. Does that make sense?
Yeah, she's nodding yes. That was a great question for Nessie and a great question or a great answer, Kevin. I think that's a really great place for us to sort of wrap things up for today, unless there's something else you wanted to show us from your cabinet.
I'll just show you a couple of quick things. Here's just about any time a submersible goes down into the depths of the ocean, styrofoam cups are put on the back, or at least they used to be. And here's an example of a normal styrofoam cup that was compressed down because of the intense pressure that occurs at the bottom of the ocean. Here is actually a rock from one of the hydrothermal vents that I visited. And I think it might have been, oh goodness, I forget, maybe it was for Nessie mentoring shelter. Well, this rock might have been sort of the shelter for some microbes in that deep sea hydrothermal vent. And here, this is a rock that contains not actual fossils from ancient life on Earth, but those little squiggly lines, those are trace fossils of some of the earliest animals that existed on Earth. So in any case, part of the fun of exploring our home planet is to also collect these little curiosities that captivate your imagination when you just need to, when you need a little inspiration.
Yeah, absolutely. That's so fascinating, Kevin. Thank you so much for showing us that. Before we sort of wrap things up today, I want to give our on-camera participants a chance to say goodbye and thank you. So everybody who's on camera, I'm going to unmute you all, and please go ahead and say goodbye.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you.
Fun talking with you.
Awesome. Yeah, this was just fantastic, Kevin. Thank you so much. That's all the time we have for today. In fact, we went quite a bit over. It's just so fascinating. We couldn't cut you off. But I want to thank you again. I want to thank our entire YouTube live stream audience for joining us. We have an amazing lineup of STEM-related live stream events left to go this week. In the next few days, we're going to be exploring the Arctic Ocean with the Mosaic expedition. We're going to be riding what's known as the Vomit Comet. We're going to be tracking animals on an island in the middle of the Panama Canal. And we're going to be simulating a journey to Mars, which is maybe related, and we'll definitely have some crossover with this event. So I hope you'll join us, and please check out the complete calendar of events at athome.reachtheworld.org. So with that, I'll say goodbye. Thanks again, Kevin.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.